Hi, everyone, and welcome to a Mulberry Talent Partners Career Conversation. My name is Leah Pons, and I am a talent acquisition specialist here at Mulberry. About Mulberry, we are a full-service recruiting agency serving the Pacific Northwest and the San Francisco Bay Area. Our specialty areas include human resources, administrative office, finance, accounting, payroll, and operations. I encourage you to check out our website at mulberrytalent.com to view our previously recorded career conversations and our current job opportunities. So let's dive in today. We are joined by our Director of Talent and Operations, Kristen McConnell, who brings over 25 years of experience in the field of staffing and recruitment. We are also joined by Jessica Khawaja, Senior Director of Talent Management at Perfect Serve. Jessica has worked in the HR and talent space for 15 years and has a passion for technical organizations. And last but not least, we are joined by Laura Sorg, who is the Talent Acquisition Manager at Oregon Tool. Laura brings over 10 years of experience as a talent acquisition professional and has recently helped build the in-house talent acquisition team at Oregon Tool. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to pass the conversation off to Kristen McConnell, Jessica Khawaja, and Laura Sorg.
All right. Thank you, Leah. We are all excited to be here. So today we are going to focus on three main topics that will provide some guidance and ideas as you are either continuing your career in talent acquisition or if you are looking to either pivot into or launch your career in talent acquisition. We will be talking about what exactly does talent acquisition mean and is it different than recruiting? What are the career path options for emerging TA specialists and TA professionals? And what are the critical skills needed to be successful in talent acquisition? But we thought before we jump into those, it might be helpful to share our individual paths and how we each have come to be where we are at today. So Laura, if you want to start us off and share your career path and how that formed and how you continue to develop in TA, that would be great.
Perfect. Thanks, Kristen. So I'll try not to bore you guys with an extra long story, but I think moral of the story is I think all of us came from a unique path. So to kick it off on my personal adventure into talent acquisition, quite frankly, I had no idea what recruiting or talent acquisition was. I was that person that had no idea what I wanted to do for my own career path coming out of high school. So ended up just going to college for a business degree because I felt like it was practical. Changed that major and schools a couple times, not going to lie, before I figured out business and a minor in hospitality management. And then ended up making a move back to the Portland, Oregon area, which is where I originally was from. And actually ended up having a contact that I knew from high school that was working at a staffing firm, Aerotech at the time. And I met with her for career opportunities, thinking she could partner me up with company and a position. And she actually convinced me to interview with them as a recruiter in-house for their team. And the rest is history on my path into recruiting. I will say I stayed in the staffing side of things for about 2.5 years, had an opportunity there to recruit different skill sets for different customers in the Portland and Washington area. Ended up getting promoted into an account management role, which is more of the customer sales facing side of the business at Aerotech. And then actually made a shift in-house to corporate recruiting in a totally different industry based on some relationships that I had with other peers. And that was with Infinity Rehab, which is a specialized offshoot of the medical side of things. Did that for about 6 months, was a great experience. And like I said, the first time in doing any sort of recruitment within the medical and healthcare industry. And then actually got recruited away by a prior manager at Aerotech to consider an opportunity at Gerber, which was manufacturing. So a totally different industry again. But honestly, I was super convinced by the time I started interviewing because of the opportunity to work on so many different skill sets within that team. And also being the first time a standalone recruiter, because I had went from a staffing agency where there's tons of recruiters, everyone's doing the same thing. It's very highly competitive, to going into another kind of in-house corporate setting where there was a team of recruiters still, to then being like a standalone recruiter where no one else in the business was actually doing that. So that has its pros and cons, as I'm sure we'll get to as we're talking about career paths and talent acquisition and recruitment, but ultimately loved manufacturing and the diversity there and ended up getting recruited away from that position, which was Gerber/Fiskars as the parent company, over to Oregon Tool with a couple of the leaders that were at the Fiskars leadership level before. So been at Oregon Tool ever since, had an opportunity to start there as an individual contributor and then build the team like was mentioned earlier, and have had also that opportunity of a lot of diverse skill sets within manufacturing. So it's been a lot of fun. But that's my path in a nutshell.
That's awesome. Thank you, Laura. Jess, how about you?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. So my entry into talent acquisition is very different. So I'll give you a very different perspective. So I started in more traditional foundational HR. I studied psychology and business in college. And so HR seemed like a really good combination of those two after I graduated. Tried a lot of different HR roles before I found talent acquisition. So I was an HR coordinator, specialist, generalist, benefits specialist, benefits analyst, benefits and compensation analyst. And throughout those roles, recruiting or talent acquisition, we're always part of those roles, hiring and developing and engaging and unfortunately terminations. So I always was around recruiting. And when I had the opportunity to take on a role and recruiting, which someone just gave me a shot, which is incredible, I found the place where I really love to be. And once I had that role, I really took off and I focused on it. So I did a lot of learning and attending webinars like this to understand what I knew and what I needed to learn. And I grew from an individual contributor into now a people leader. So it was a really incredible path for me. And as we get into career paths, as you grow, you don't always need to get in a people leadership position. But for me, I really love that part of the job. And where I've taken talent acquisition more recently is I'm now in a talent management role. And what that means is talent acquisition is still part of my role, but now I get to continue some of the other things that I loved about HR, like performance and engagement and nourishing that talent after we recruit and hire them. So it's a really exciting opportunity for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. And my path is a little bit different as well. When I moved to Portland many years ago, following earning a degree in elementary education, I realized after about 1 year of teaching, that was probably not my meant to be long-term career path, and wanted to try something else and try something new. I didn't even know about the recruiting industry, the staffing industry, knew nothing about it. But for some reason, I thought working for a law firm would be exciting, a more professional position. And so I interviewed with a firm, and they did not hire me, but they introduced me to a recruiter who worked at an agency at the time called Legal Northwest, and introduced me to him. And he took some time to meet with me and was pretty honest and said, I don't know what to do with you. You really don't have any legal experience, because they place specifically within law firms. He said, but we do have a position open with our corporate office at Northwest Staffing. And so I started off as a recruiting coordinator at Northwest Staffing. And 25 years later, I was still there and grew up from a recruiting coordinator into, at the time we called them staffing coordinators, into recruiter, into talent acquisition, and then really transitioned into more of a business development role. And so was working with our clients more directly on their staffing needs and what those looked like, which I really loved that perspective, as well as really understanding what all the different businesses do and how we could support them from an agency perspective with their staffing. And then eventually moved into managing the Portland office and then into a regional position with Legal Northwest, being one of my branches. So I felt like I got back to my roots a little bit there. And then in 2021, I took the exciting opportunity to join Lauren over at Mulberry Talent Partners, which has been just a great fit. It was a chance to really move into a different kind of exposure in recruiting with more professional level positions within HR, those suite of services that Leah listed out in the beginning. I think that's really important when we think about our careers, is if there's an opportunity to add to your repertoire of the areas in which you know how to recruit and identify talent, take those opportunities when they come your way, because it really just helps round out your skill set. So my focus all along in this industry has really been more on a lot of client development, client relationships, building teams, managing teams, which has been really exciting. So In fact, that's how I actually met Jess so many years ago. She was a client of mine at Northwest Staffing. And when she was ready to make that transition into talent acquisition, she called and said, "Hey, how do I do this?" And it was just like she said, she had to find someone that was willing to take a chance on her and give her that opportunity. So just, it's a really fun industry for anybody that is naturally a people person, a curious person. That is, I think, the number one component you have to have is just a natural curiosity. So when we think about our first objective and how that all plays in, and exactly does talent acquisition mean, and is it different than recruiting? Because that has evolved in all of our careers since we've been doing this. That has really evolved over time quite a bit. And they are really two different concepts. And oftentimes we see companies using the term and the job title interchangeably. There's staffing, there's recruiting, there's talent acquisition, and they're not all the same. And I think a lot of times medical healthcare recruiters are oftentimes doing a lot of staffing because a lot of that shift work. Same thing with manufacturing. Recruiting is when you're out, you're looking for that large volume of talent potentially and identifying pockets of talent and how do you bring those in. And so those, like I say, they tend to be a bit more shift focused, schedule focused, not always entry level, but oftentimes more entry level roles. Super important critical function within a lot of organizations, but it is different. Talent acquisition is more that overarching concept of how a company attracts and acquires talent, meaning people. And it's very closely partnered with how we retain this talent that we've worked so hard to attract. And in some ways, it's more of it's almost like a business partner within an organization. I think when I think about a talent acquisition partner, you are a partner to those different HR teams within an organization because it's a strategy behind recruiting and placing of candidates. Whereas recruitment is focused specifically on filling vacancies at a specific time versus that ongoing of what we're looking at. So in an agency world, which is the world I'm obviously most familiar with, this means for us being able to really partner with our clients and our candidates to be able to understand their needs and then develop a strategy to support them. Sometimes that strategy doesn't always have to mean long process. Sometimes it's a quick turn strategy, and other times it's a much longer a process of identifying how do we get them from A to Z. And we have to recruit and identify talent for positions that we're currently working on. But we also have to constantly be thinking about identifying and attracting talent for future opportunities and what we don't even know is out there, but to be prepared so that when our clients come to us with these needs is having that developed pipeline of candidates. Like I say, on the agency side, it's really that twofold process of you're dealing with what's in the now, but then you're also doing your best to guess what's coming down the pipeline. So when we think about this in terms of our candidates, that also includes how we share the opportunities that we're working on with them and how we stay engaged with them as they move through their job search, making sure that we stay connected in a way that is meaningful to them and it keeps them attracted to us as we do agency work. It requires and then also affords us the opportunity to have this really strong network of candidates that we're getting to work with at all times and to be just somewhat ready for whatever will come our way. On the client side, I'm biased. I know one world, but I just think there's just nothing more fun than agency work. No two searches are the same. No two requisitions are the same. No two clients are the same. You never know what's coming your way. And you definitely know when a rec's coming in that is going to be a hot one. We just got one in this morning that we're like, oh man, alive. The minute we post this, we know it's going to be a hot one and it's going to be popular. And so it's always kind of that thrill of the big thing. For those of you that have wondered what the difference is between agency and maybe in-house, I would say it's probably the variety is, I think, the biggest differentiator there. And then just really being able to help our clients and guide them on what's the best way to approach a search and what do we need to look for. And we have to make sure that we're up to speed on all the trends that are happening in the market, what's happening with compensation. Things are obviously shifting a little bit right now in the market. And how is that looking and being prepared for those conversations? The last 2 years, we know that it was all about stretching limits with our clients in terms of compensation and total rewards and different packages that are being offered. I think that we've shifted a little bit. There's definitely been more focus on how to retain these individuals that we've worked really hard to attract and capture. And I think this next year is going to look maybe a little bit more of a level set in terms of the candidate pipeline and the candidate pool. And so our job is to really help those candidates understand is that maybe things have shifted a little bit this year, and there's not maybe as much room as there had been to push a little bit on some of those things, but still some really great opportunities out there. So a lot of strategy involved in just this kind of work, which is really exciting. Lastly, I just want to touch on the pace can be a lot different in an agency. Both, I think, corporate and in-house have really fast pace. That's just the nature of who we are as individuals. If this is the world that we live in, we tend to like to go. And I think sometimes we see candidates that make that shift from agency into corporate and they think, oh, is this for me? Because like I say, that variety, that pace can be a little bit different. You now have internal customers versus external customers. And so it's really just about identifying for you, what is your sweet spot? And if you get the opportunity to do a little bit of both, I think that's great. I think that's the ideal, is to really think about how, like I said earlier, how do you round out that skill set in talent acquisition, whether it's the type of positions you're working on, agency versus corporate. We all know that tech recruiters have a very different life than other agency recruiters. And so there's just so many different options out there for people. So with that, it leads us into our second objective, and Jess will talk about what are some of the different career path options for emerging professionals and even those that are more experienced in the world of TA.
Thank you, Kristen. Your story about pace and whether agency or moving into a more corporate setting reminds me of one of the best talent acquisition partners I've ever worked with. She came from an agency, joined my team when I was at Smarsh, and after her first week, there is so many meetings. When do I get to actually recruit? And so even that was an interesting perspective, that you're ingrained in the business, which will hopefully make you a better talent acquisition partner. But there's a lot of meetings, so you keep up with what we're doing, how things are going, how to sell the role. Kristen set us up really well from a career path perspective and a discussion there, because you could see that every industry, agency, internal staffing, there is so much opportunity. And not only is there so much opportunity from where you could put your skill set, but even within the talent acquisition realm, yes, you have to be curious. But let's say if you aren't a real people person, data is huge. Metrics drive success and change within the talent acquisition process. And that wasn't always the case. And so if you like data and operations and systems, there's a place for you within the talent acquisition space. Let's say you don't necessarily love chatting with people, but you love doing the research and finding the perfect person. There's a place that you're a sourcer, you're a talent sourcer or a talent acquisition sourcer, whatever the title is there, where you're just mining for amazing people, whether that's using LinkedIn Recruiter or a lot of other tools to find really good candidates. And as I mentioned before, you don't always have to stay as an individual contributor, and you can move into people leadership to help other people grow the business and have a more strategic place within whatever agency or corporate environment you're working on. However, you don't necessarily need to, and you could be very specialized. I know people who have never been in people leadership positions who are the best technical recruiters. They've been doing it for 35 years, and they have their niche that they know so well. So it really depends on what you like to do. There really is going to be an opportunity to be part of this particular piece of an organization.
That's awesome. Jess, I'm really curious about the data piece on the talent side, but I think that is an area that is really becoming more prevalent in what organizations are looking for. What's actually the outcome of some of this? So what do some of those roles look like on the talent team?
Maybe if I start with how data can drive change within an organization, you can understand what we're looking at, because there's so many different ways you can slice and dice data. Yeah, time to fill, quality of hire, retention, like those types of things. But what I really believe is the most important piece is it allows you to have conversations that can sometimes be difficult, backed by data. You're not giving a feeling, oh, no one's making it through this phase. You're like, we looked at this and the pass-through rate from this particular area to this is 20%. What are we missing? Or when you get to the offer stage and you have a 90% acceptance rate, that's fantastic. You know that your hiring team is super aligned and they are giving an accurate description of what this role is. So when they go and they get that offer, there's no surprises. And the acceptance rate, we've set the stage, they know the foundation, they're clear on what the comp is. And so you could use data to really drive change or double down on things that are going really well. The way data can help from a business perspective is also kind of a change in just HR in general. I think HR sometimes was looked at as necessary evil, and it's not really like a business, it's just a cost. But if you really think about it, turnover costs money. And so companies get it now. They want to hire the right people. They want to retain the people to lessen turnover. And that's like a very basic. There's a lot of other metrics that we look at as HR professionals, but the data is more and more important in our business functions. It also shows your worth within the organization. You're like, look at, we built this whole team. Look at how successful they are. They haven't had any turnover in 2 years. And they're like, oh my gosh, do that again. All right, next project, here you go. So there's a lot of different ways you could use it. And having somebody who enjoys looking at that is really important. When you work at a smaller organization, you do everything. Laura was talking about being a team of one. I have definitely been there. So I was your sourcer, I was your recruiter, I was your ops person, I was your systems person, I was your data person, and that's awesome. But as you move into other larger organizations, you could really find the stuff that you like to do.
That makes sense. Absolutely. Thank you. All right, Laura, bring us home.
Perfect. So yeah, and you guys have set me up perfectly with your comments already. So I was going to talk a bit more about the different types of skills and personality traits that would be successful in talent acquisition. I think just to sum that up, you can have lots of different personality traits and skills and be successful in talent acquisition. It is the reality at the end of the day. I will tell you, it's probably one of those career paths where there is not a defined educational path that makes the most sense. You can come from a lot of different areas. My husband, for example, is in recruiting and he's an English major, which I still can't believe is the case. But that being said, that's his background and he is highly successful in it. We were talking about being curious. I do agree that is very much front of mind when you are a recruiter, because you have to be able to have conversations and ask questions all day, every day. Because at the end of the day, we're not the technical experts in what we're recruiting. I'm by any means not an engineer or good at math. So obviously I need to be able to just be inquisitive, ask the right questions, and be curious. I honestly think about recruiting and talent acquisition as basically dating, quite frankly. And I know sometimes that's silly when you're talking to your hiring managers or your clients if you're in the staffing world, but that is the reality. At the end of the day, we're trying to make a match, and that's going to be the right fit for both parties. And you're the middleman in that conversation, and you need to be looking at it that way. I think the best thing that I always try to tell my team is that no matter what company you're working for, you need to have personal integrity. And so I think that is something that is more of a personality trait that makes recruiters sustainable recruiters or talent acquisition partners, is understanding that, yes, at the end of the day, I'm here to find the right person for that role. But in order for me to set myself up for success to continue my career long-term, whether it's at this company or another company, I have to be able to be realistic and set realistic expectations with those candidates, and quite frankly with hiring managers. And just like you mentioned, those conversations with data are way easier than just telling them how you feel or a gut feeling. So I think coming back to being curious, being someone that's resilient. We all know in recruiting and talent acquisition, there's highs and there's lows. And depending on the types of recruitment that you're doing, whether it's production or a high level VP or director, there's going to be times where things don't go your way and you get that reminder of, oh yeah, that's probably a question I should have asked on the front end before I got to this point. And no matter if you've been in the business for 5 years or 50 years, hopefully no one's working in recruiting for 50 years, but 25 years, let's say, there's going to be things that you're going to miss. So I think you also just have to give yourself grace. And that kind of goes back to that resilience. It's being determined, it's not giving up, and realizing that no matter how long you've been doing this and how skilled you are at what you do, every circumstance is going to be different. So I always think it's funny when people say, how can you be a recruiter? It seems like such a repetitive job. The reality is, yes, if you maybe think about it from a task perspective, it can be, but it is so fluid and so dynamic and so invigorating. And so from that perspective, it definitely is a grind, but for the right person, it's the perfect grind. So I always just say we're definitely the folks that just are not willing to just sit still, more than likely. We're the folks that want to make sure that we're making a difference in doing something and being willing to make mistakes. So that's where I get my passion. And I think coming back to Jess's point on data, I think oftentimes we all make the assumption that you need to be an extrovert to be successful in this career path. Sure, it probably helps at the end of the day when you've had like a bajillion phone screens and you're probably exhausted from talking to people, but that isn't necessarily going to be the case always, right? Because there's a lot of different places that you can take your career, like Jess mentioned. And also that really depends on the size of the organization as well, right? So you could be a small one-man shop and doing everything from the beginning to end in the process, or you can be a sourcer on a larger team or a talent partner. What I love about what Jess gets to do, it sounds, is obviously more of that partnership. Because like for me, for example, on my team, we have HR business partners. So there is a handoff point in that process between talent acquisition and them. But again, figuring out how you can be that consultative partner and making sure that you still have a seat at the table as it relates to offers, partnership, planning, and all of that. So those would be my top 3 more than likely in terms of skill sets that would align. But at the end of the day, just again, knowing that it's not cookie cutter. And obviously recruiting is never cookie cutter. So.
Right, that's right. Is there something that stands out for you, Laura? You've obviously hired a lot of people. You've brought them into a team. Does anything stand out for you in terms of at that point you realize like, oh, this person's they're gonna thrive at this?
Good. Yeah, I think the thing that I love about my team, for example, right now is that they're all so different and they're all so unique and they all come from a different background, like I mentioned. But the one commonality that we all have is that we all have a strong work ethic. And so as a manager of people, you can't kind of force that into anyone. They have to just have that as a personality trait. So for me, it's really an awesome opportunity just to make sure to direct them with any kind of coaching they need as it relates to the technical ability of their role. But when it comes to making sure that they're putting in the time and putting in the effort, like I don't have to do that. I quite frankly have to reel them back, right? Because as recruiters and talent acquisition partners, we always know that the managers needed someone yesterday and it is a high pressure job. But we also have to make sure that we find that balance. Back to your point, Kristen, I think you mentioned the diversity of being on the staffing agency side versus being in-house. I think that having both of those experiences is huge because on the agency side, the turnaround time and the pressure is really intense and you're constantly being measured against the performance of your peers. I think when you get in-house, it's not as intense, but you have to also make sure that you understand how to put the right pressure on the team to be successful, but also celebrate the wins. Because I think on the agency side, oftentimes there's that glamorous aspect of happy hours and that fun stuff that helps with the balancing act of the intensity. And corporate world, sometimes it's easy to forget about that. Back to that's where I would say that dynamic and mix comes into play too.
That makes sense. Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Leah, did we have anyone pop in with any questions?
Yes, we did get a question. The question is, how has the job evolved in relation to DEI, sourcing, new channels for recruitment, style of job descriptions, etc.?
Gosh, I'll take a first crack at this. In some ways, I want to say a ton, and then in other ways, it still seems like there's a long ways to go. But I think for me, the biggest standout has been on some of those, the words within a job description and just realizing and recognizing what we're putting out there, whether we're in-house or agency, what we are putting out there and in a way to attract the candidate to us versus attracting exactly a perfect person, because there is no ideal fit anymore. There's no culture fit anymore, all those things, and just really recognizing what different individuals can bring to the table. As far as avenues for recruiting, I think this is something we all need more exposure to. I think that we all want to find additional avenues and resources to recruit from a more diverse candidate pool. I don't know, Laura and Jess, if you have anything additional to add there.
Yeah, I was going to chime in on a couple tools that we've started to implement that helps our team be more proactive in finding diverse talent. So there are a lot of bias kind of evaluators for job posting. So we actually have a tool in-house where we're going to start to filter all of our job posting content through to ensure that there's no higher level of masculine versus feminine word use. We all know also that statistic around women applying for jobs that they're 100% qualified for versus their male counterparts, right? So again, really pressing your hiring managers to realign on expectations for what's a must-have qualification versus not, and having less of those bullet points in there from that perspective, and using more language, letting everyone to apply whether or not you meet all the expectations of this job. Those are tools that we're using, as well as LinkedIn. If you guys are using LinkedIn Recruiter, you can take off the images and the names on your projects as you're sourcing talent to make sure that you're also not having your own bias as you're looking at those talent pools. So to your point, Kristen, there's a long way to go still, I think. And part of it also is just being that consultative partner with your hiring managers. Because coming from a manufacturing industry and knowing how male dominated that can be from a leadership perspective, especially, those need to be conversations that recruiters and talent acquisition partners need to be comfortable having.
Agreed. Jess, do you have anything additional?
So I was just going to share a tool. It's by JobVite and it's called the Job Description Grader. And it's a free tool. So that's why I'm sharing it here, which does look for biased language and things that Laura had mentioned. If you haven't used that before, go for it. It really helps.
Awesome. Great. All right. Anyone else, Leah?
Yes, we did get one final question. Someone said, I'm having a much harder time finding a new job than I did in previous years. The unemployment rate is down. With the tech and DEI layoffs, do you think competition is up and not necessarily reflected in the unemployment rate?
That's a good question. I do think we know that there's probably more talent acquisition specialists on the market than there was this time last year. And obviously the tech industry did get hit harder than many, but you're right. But there are still more opportunities than there are candidates. I think that our skill set, so to speak, our function just might be a heavy one within that unemployment group right now. But I can tell you in the last week, we've received 3 new opportunities for talent acquisition professionals at different levels. So we're already seeing, if companies had made changes, they're already starting to swing back a little bit the other way, because it's really hard to not have a dedicated individual on the team responsible for talent acquisition, especially those HR departments of one. Those people are amazing individuals, but when they are trying to do all things HR and be the company's recruiter, that's usually where we see that need come back in. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
I also think to be open to industry. I'm not sure if you were impacted by the tech change recently in the layoffs, but I was in the middle of last year. And when I was laid off, I was incredibly scared, and I knew there was a downturn in talent acquisition, and it does hit your confidence a bit. I'm like, in my case, I'm like, I would hire me. Like, this is what I do. Like, I would do this. And I think for me, I had to get really comfortable with going outside of my comfort zone and going outside of the industry that I knew best, and understanding how to correlate my skill set and say, hey, I haven't done this, this is what I have done. I know I can do this. And it's really scary, but just go for it. Go outside your comfort zone, go outside your industry. You'll never know where you end up. And for me, I don't know if it's my brain just protecting itself, but for me, I ended up in a better position because I was able to take what I've learned in my HR foundation, mix it with talent acquisition. And I feel like I'm in a role that really suits not only what I enjoy, but what I'm good at. Good luck.
Yes.
I'm in there.
All right.
And then the last question for today, what can someone pursuing work in talent acquisition do outside of work to develop skills and become a more attractive job candidate for the limited open positions in this career?
Personally, I think because they're starting to come back a little bit, try and get out to some of the networking events. And there's just different things that are starting to pop up. And for example, today we have someone on our team that's going to the resume workshop. And, those people that are putting those types of events on, they're recruiters, they're talent acquisition individuals, and they are just great places to network with people. And do what Jess did. Call people up that that are in talent acquisition and just say, okay, how did you get your start? Where did you first land? And I'll say you may have to be open, depending on what kind of pivot you're doing, you may have to be open to a different compensation range. And I know that's easier said than done. You may start a different range. And honestly, it's a little easier in some ways to break into agency first, then corporate, and then launch into corporate if that's the path that you decide you want to go. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, Kristen, I couldn't agree with you more. That was the one thing I was going to say is definitely agencies are constantly hiring. The only thing that Kristen already mentioned too is oftentimes their base pay is certainly lower because there's a commission element there too. I think you just have to evaluate that, but network and go and meet as many people as you possibly can. And also that's a good experience for being a recruiter in the first place. So if you find yourself struggling to do that, I would also maybe think, is that what you want to really do?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody. If you haven't connected with us on LinkedIn, you can find each one of us on there. Always happy to connect and network with individuals. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.